Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive positive recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of Positive Recovery MD podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest. I actually met Joseph Gorordo. Was that right?
See? Yeah.
I met him in San Antonio. I was giving a talk. Julie introduced me. We were all there. And he and I have a barbecue in common. So we were kindred souls, at least on that front. We're also both friends of Bill. And Joseph is the outreach director or president of business development or whatever titles. He is president, he's God of everything for Recovery Unplugged. He's also former president of the Austin chapter of the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals and current president-elect for the same organizations. So I'm here for any of that graft, baby. No, he's a licensed chemical. He's a licensed chemical. I'm not sure what graft, but he's a licensed chemical dependency counselor that has been in the field of substance abuse treatment since 2009. He himself is in long-term recovery since 2008. He co-hosts a podcast called Talksicology, which I love. I love to play on words. It is not a discussion of urine drug screens or toxicology, but TALKSICOLOGY, a weekly live discussion on mental health, addiction, and recovery. Welcome, Joseph. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting to get to do this. You know, I'm hosting that other podcast all the time, so I don't get to be in the interviewee seat that often. So this is exciting for me.
It's awesome. So tell our listeners, what was it like before you got sober? What happened around the time of you getting sober? And what is it like now?
Yeah. So, I mean, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. It's such a broad prompt, you know? And I love it when some people are like, well, I was born on a dark summer day.
Yeah, I was going to say, which farm were you born on?
Yeah.
How many in your litter?
Yeah. But so I was born in Austin, Texas, where I live now. Born in Austin, Texas, my parents met at St. Edward's. They were both Mexican nationals who had gone to Austin in the late 70s, early 80s to further their educations. And they met there. And I used to joke that they were the only two Mexicans at St. Edward's in the 80s. So
they had to get married.
Yeah, they had no options. It was just the two of them. But, just some like early childhood stuff that like I think is impactful, is, they, pretty early on after I was born, things started to kind of go awry. By the time I was 4, they had separated. And, I think in no small part due to my dad, he's an undiagnosed alcoholic. Maybe he's not an alcoholic, I don't know, but he drinks a lot and always has. So, I've got the genetics for addiction. The deck was stacked against me from the beginning. When my parents separated, my mother and we moved to Laredo, Texas. My mother was born in Nuevo Laredo, so just across the border. Things were okay. I didn't have a bad childhood. We didn't have a lot of money, but, I had a hardworking mother that went back to college while working as a teacher, while raising 2 boys by herself. And, we never wanted for anything, but I always had that, that idea of I had the ism before I had the alcohol. I can see it in my thinking from a real young age. My mom worked really hard to send me to a private school there in Laredo. And that idea of being less than, it was very prevalent for me from a very early age. I was the only kid who didn't have, I'm sure I wasn't the only kid, but in my mind I was, right? I was the only kid whose parents weren't together. I was the only kid that didn't have the brand new Nike shoes, shopping at Marshalls and Payless. And it's so funny because today I prefer to shop at the discount stores, right? But when I was a kid, it was a mark of shame. Yeah. I think one of the bigger things was that I didn't feel like I fit in, being raised by a woman. Like, I wasn't super macho, I wasn't good at sports. I much preferred, reading books and watching TV and all that kind of stuff. I can see that my first escape really from like feeling what I feel, right? My first escape from like my thoughts and all that kind of stuff was those things, right? Like, I was really into sci-fi books, horror books. I don't think it's normal for like 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds to read Stephen King books, but I did. Something about the darkness just, it attracted me, and it distracted me from everything else. At the time, I didn't realize it, but it was very much that. Like, it was an escape. It was, I don't have to think about me. I don't have to think about the problems that I think I have, how I don't think I'm good enough for the situation I'm in, all that kind of stuff. And pretty quickly, once alcohol and drugs became available to me, I discovered that those were a much more effective way of escapism. They were a much more effective means of forgetting about who I was. First started experimenting with alcohol probably around the age of 10, just, slipping a drink here and there from, my grandparents' liquor cabinet. I spent a lot of time growing up in Mexico, and in Mexico, there's beer at 3-year-olds' birthday parties. There's open bars at family events and things like that. And, I don't know if it was the time period or the culture, but if you asked for an alcohol, they were going to give you alcohol. Started experimenting with alcohol, and eventually, started experimenting with marijuana. Like I mentioned, my dad, he was a alcoholic, or drinks and uses drugs. And so first time I smoked weed, I stole it from my dad. I found it in his drawer, and I took a corncob pipe from my grandpa, and I took some weed from my dad, and I smoked it by myself. And I think it's real interesting that, like, I didn't have that experience of like being with friends trying these things, like having these first time experiences with alcohol and drugs. It was always pretty much by myself. And I think it illustrates like that escapism, right? I wasn't after like camaraderie, or I wasn't trying to be able to talk to girls or have fun. I was just trying to numb from the very beginning. Continued experimenting, through high school. Things kind of started to progress in what I still think is like a typical high school fashion. Smoking a little bit more weed. Growing up in Laredo, Texas, pharmaceuticals were always readily available. Other kind of soft or mid-level drugs, if you will, were pretty regular through high school. But what I started to see as I got deeper and deeper into alcohol and drugs is like my friend group started to shift. The friends that I came into high school with, that I consider, like my real friends, kind of started to spend less and less time around me. And I started to spend more and more time around people who drank and used the way I did, right? It wasn't about shared interests, same kind of music, same hobbies. It was about, do you like to party? And even amongst that crowd, I was always the guy who wanted to go a little bit further than we should have. I was the guy who would drink and black out and puke and then wake up a little bit later and then drink some more. I made it through high school by the skin of my teeth, right? I actually almost didn't graduate senior year because I was going to fail my yearbook class. And I think that's a good example of the kind of burnout I was. And, I wasn't a stupid kid. Like, I was pretty smart, I think I was. The drugs kind of consumed me in a sense that they became my identity, Like, I didn't just smoke a little weed. Like, I was a weed smoker, right? Like, I read magazines and listened to music and watched movies, and it really consumed who I was. After high school, I pretty much moved out of my mom's house about a month after I graduated high school. As soon as I turned 18, I wanted to be grown. I wanted to be a big kid. And when you're the first kid in your friend group to have an apartment with no adults, the party comes to you. And quickly things just kind of escalated to where, I graduated from high school in May of 2002. And by the end of the year, I was selling cocaine, dabbling in heroin, living with I had a much older girlfriend, a lady of the night, if you will. And I thought in my mind, I was living this like rock star movie lifestyle. And all my peers that went on to go to college and pursue degrees, they were sheep. They weren't really living man. Like I was this nihilistic, I don't know, rebel without a cause, really. At the time, I thought I was still maintaining pretty well. I had all these little systems for how I was not a drug addict. It's like, it's not bad to do cocaine as long as you're not spending your own money on it. Or you can do heroin, but never 3 days in a row. 3 days in a row, that's a problem. But 2 days, just fine. And all these little kind of systems that I thought, that were justifications for me that I wasn't a drug addict, right? That all changed in July of 2003. My best friend at the time, Lori, she and I were cut from the same cloth. She was part of my systems of, we're just going to do heroin 2 days or whatever. And one day we were July 1st, 2003, we were attempting to not do heroin that day by instead taking Xanax and drinking beer. And, we hung out, we partied, went our separate ways. And that night, like 2 a.m. or something, I get a phone call and Lori's, calling me asking if I know where to score any heroin. And I don't really remember the conversation. I was under the influence, but I know it didn't go well. And there was some kind of argument between the two of us. And, the next morning I show up to work at the college that I worked at the time. And there was a friend of ours, a mutual friend, waiting for me on the steps of the office building that I worked in. And she just said, "Lori's dead. She overdosed." And in that moment, being that young, being 18 and having a friend of mine die, thinking that, I thought I was grown, and I look back now and I was just a kid, playing with things and doing things that were far beyond what I had any business doing. But, that was really a turning point for me, where the idea of maintaining systems, and trying to kind of pretend to be normal or lie to myself about who I was or what I was doing, it all kind of went out the window. And I kind of threw myself fully into heroin addiction. And that really marked the next 5-6 years of my life, where I did all the things that you think of when you think of a heroin addict, right? Like pawning things, stealing things, donating plasma, robbing from stores, snatching purses, getting arrested, sleeping in my car, like all the bottoms that people talk about. I hit them all and just kept falling down the ladder to a deeper rung, bouncing in and out of treatment, detoxing in jails. At one point it was so severe where my family, which is mostly comprised of women with doctorates, right? Like educated women, they had a meeting one day to discuss what to do with me. And the best plan they were able to come up with was to take me out to a friend of the family's ranch and dig a big hole and just keep me in the hole until I came to my senses. And I didn't know that until after I was sober. And when they told me about that, I started laughing, and they were like, "No, this was a serious discussion." And that was the best thing that we can do. And I think it really shows like how helpless families are when faced with a loved one who's addicted. That women, intelligent people with degrees and resources would arrive at that kind of conclusion as the best option, right?
Doing anything requires an enormous amount of love and courage. So yeah, while that's not a prescribed treatment plan that you or I might come up with, I'm actually amazed and inspired by their love and courage.
Yeah,
because think about physically doing that. A bunch of women to a guy, you could run away and overpower him, but just the act of doing it is such a sacrifice.
My cousin Yvonne actually did overpower me one time. I don't think I've ever told this story on one of these things, but so
all right, we got the scoop, Julie.
I was detoxing in my aunt's house in Seguin, Texas. My family was trying to convince me to go to treatment, and I said that I would, but that I needed to go visit the gravesite of my friend who had died of an overdose. So my cousin Yvonne and my other cousin's husband drove me from Seguin to Laredo, Texas, about a 4-hour drive to go to this graveyard. And the second I got out of the car, I tried to take off running. Now, I was 2 days into a heroin detox and weighed about 130 pounds. So I didn't make it very far. My cousin Yvonne physically restrained me, picked me up and threw me back in the car. And we just drove straight back to Seguin, Texas. And it comes full circle, though. She's a professor now at a university in San Antonio. And once a semester, I get to go tell my story to her students. And that's my living amends to her for putting her through that. But anyway, so at one point I ended up going to rehab in Mexico for 11 months. Old school rehab. Like if you guys are familiar with like therapeutic community kind of model of treatment, think of like that ratcheted up a notch. You know, very client run. Sleep deprivation was one of the tools used to keep people well behaved. Restrictions on food and what you could eat and all that kind of stuff was how they kind of kept the order. And at this place, all they had for us, we had to read mandatorily 1 hour a day. We had to read in silence. And there was only 3 options. There was a Bible, there was a big book, and there was a 12 and 12. So I read the big book probably front to back 15, 16 times while I was there. And I learned the AA lingo, and I learned how to quote different passages of the book and share real pretty. And like, oh, it says on page 42 and 58 and this and that. And I could speak the talk, but I never worked a step. And when I got out of that place after 11 months, I thought, I wanted to be sober, like for real, right? B, I had all this knowledge about the 12 steps and the big book. I walked out fully intending to stay sober, and for the first time ever, felt that horrible thing of wanting to not get high, but not being able to stop myself. Every other time I went to treatment, I was just trying to avoid consequences. I was trying to get out of jail. Someone made me go, but it was the first time that, I wanted to not use.
And you used anyway, or you just had that struggle?
No, I used anyway.
Yeah.
I used anyway. I made it 4 days out of treatment before I used. I was staying with my dad, and he kept a jar of weed in a cabinet right by the jar of coffee. And on the third night, it wasn't very helpful. It wasn't very helpful. But on the third night that I was staying with him, I wanted to smoke weed so bad. Like I had this urge and I didn't want to. And what I did is I prayed and I went to bed at 8 o'clock because I was like, if I'm asleep, I can't get high.
Yeah, you can't use while you're sleeping. Right.
Exactly. And the next morning I woke up, and instead of grabbing the coffee jar, I grabbed the jar of weed and, got high and hated myself for it. And that sparked like the last 6 months of my using. So my last 6 months that I was using, I had a new experience with using. I had gotten really good at avoiding consequences. So in those last 6 months, man, I got back into college. I made the dean's list. I was working at a bank. I was going to 12-step meetings, picking up chips or key tags. I was chairing meetings. Every aspect of my life seemed like someone who was in recovery, except for the fact that I was getting high every single day. It was wild, but it was incredibly lonely because I didn't have like using buddies anymore because I had this facade to keep up. So everyone in my life was proud of me, telling me how good I was doing. I had a sponsor that would take me out to eat every time I picked up hit a milestone.
I think he was clued in that you relapsed when you picked up your third 3-month chip in like 4 days.
Yeah. But so, all the negative stuff that I'd been through already wasn't my bottom. Like at the end of the day, my bottom was everything externally was great. I had 2 girlfriends, but the internal piece was just falling apart. I still went to bed every night praying to not wake up and woke up every morning disappointed. What ended up happening is July 20th of 2008, I didn't have any money and I didn't have any drugs. And I was, my only option was to go pawn something. And something in the back of my mind told me that like, if I went and pawned something that day, that the idea of keeping up a facade was going to go out the window. And I was going to go, see how deep I could dig the hole again. So what I ended up doing is I told my mom, I said, Mom, I relapsed. Even then I couldn't be honest. I was like, I relapsed about a month ago. And I told her, I said, I will go to treatment tomorrow, but I need you to give me some money right now. And, my poor mother, I had her so scared and codependent that, she gave me money and I went and I did my thing and I came back came back home and she put me on the phone with the rehab and, I did my little pre-screen and they said, okay, come tomorrow. Once they said, you're all scheduled for tomorrow, I was like, well, I might as well go pawn the guitar if I'm going to rehab, tomorrow. And as I was trying to sneak out of the house to pawn the guitar, my mom saw me, ran outside. And this is, July in Laredo, Texas. She ran outside and threw herself on the ground in front of the car so that I wouldn't leave. Begging, screaming, snot coming out of her nose, saying, if you leave, you're going to die. I know it. I feel it. And, I got out of the car and I said, well, if you don't want me to leave, I'm going to need some more money. And in that moment, I didn't feel bad about it at all, and, but here's where things get good, right? Like that was the last time I've seen my mother cry, it's been 13 years. And if she's cried in those 13 years, it hasn't been because of me. And like, to me, that's huge. But, I went to treatment, and this last time that I went to treatment, I didn't do anything crazy. Like there was no like miraculous, the skies opened up and now you're sober moment, right? I just did what people told me to do. They said, work the steps. And I was like, okay, I'll work the steps. They said, I got sober in Kerrville. And so they paired me up with the only other guy from South Texas that they knew in Kerrville. They're like, that guy's your sponsor because he's from McAllen and you're from Laredo. You'll get along. But, they were like, that's your sponsor. Like, you need to go to sober living. And I was like, okay, how long should I stay? They're like, just stay until you don't need to anymore. So, stayed in sober living for a year. And my mother was very upset with me that I did not go home. I think some of that codependency, that Hispanic kind of Mexican tradition, in Mexico, you don't leave your house until you're getting married and having a family, right? Like you stay at your parents' home. She got so mad that I wasn't going to come home that on the day I got out of treatment, she picked me up, took me to get a haircut, took me to lunch. And then she dropped me off at sober living, gave me $100 and said, don't call me anymore. And like, she meant it because I had hurt her so much. Oh, and it wasn't the stealing and the rehab and all that. It was the fact that it wasn't. And, when she said that to me, I knew like, this has to be the time that you get this, I knew it. And I put my nose to the grindstone and I kept working my steps and I, got a job at a car wash and I walked to the job at the car wash. And I remember the first month I paid my rent, it was like $350 and I didn't steal from anybody. I didn't do anything illegal. It was money that I earned myself and I paid. Like I wanted to cry. It was, I was so happy in that moment. So that's what happened is that, I tried every little plan and design I could think of to still be able to drink and use every little system, I'll just do this or I'll just do that, or I'll do it like this. And I had to fail in all my attempts before I was willing to listen to advice from other people. And lo and behold, when I listened to what other people said was going to work, I didn't have to get high anymore. That's what happened is I just quit having ideas. As far as what it's like now, at about 9 months sober, I got my girlfriend pregnant, which was a super scary thing, right? Because I had just figured out how to take care of myself.
Your wife was really upset.
Well, she's my wife now.
I know.
But I'm still with the girl that I met 60 days sober. We've been married 10 years, together for 13. We've got 3 kids, ages 12, 10, and 4. They're the best thing ever. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to try to be a father to them that I didn't have. My kids have never experienced like daddy not coming home at night. They've never experienced me and their mom having a knockdown drag out in the kitchen. My kids have gotten told, I love you every single day of their lives. And that's all stuff that I didn't have. So that's probably the greatest thing that recovery's given me. But, I mentioned, right, like right at the end, like my bottom was everything being okay and still being miserable and wanting to die. And today, everything could be falling apart, right? Like I could have problems at work, I could have a sick kid, I could have bills due, and things are still okay, because for me, I still work a 12-step program. I try to maintain a spiritual condition. And I know that if I can maintain that condition, there is no challenge that is going to force me to get high, and there isn't a challenge that we can't find a solution to, that can't be walked through, even if it's challenging. Yeah, it's just, it's all just a huge blessing, to be able to work in treatment and mentor other men early in recovery, mentor men who have got some recovery and are trying to go from, trying to become fathers and become heads of households and become professionals, like getting to help them grow. And that kind of stuff is just, it's an amazing thing. Just as amazing as the fact that like my mom comes over and she leaves her purse in the living room and doesn't even worry about it. It's wild, because the man I am today bears almost no resemblance to who I was 13 years ago. But I know that if I were to ever pick up again, that guy's still right there. I could be right back there in short order. So yeah, I guess that's my story.
Yeah, man, that was great. Like I inserted a couple jokes, obviously, but I don't think I've ever not led. You were great. You're a great storyteller. It's very fluid. Great moments of insight. The transition was great. Yeah, man. Julie, I'm good. I don't have any questions. I don't know if you do.
I don't. I just had a comment, and I'll go right into it. And then I think Dr. Powers will switch gears into the next kind of section of our podcast, and we'll still get you out on time. Joseph, in your current role now, kind of working in the space, and then also becoming the incoming president for TAP, and a lot of our listeners are folks who are either in recovery or addiction professionals. What do you kind of see as something that's important in that space for addiction professionals? And you get to inspire a lot of people now to get help and to come into this space. So what does that look and feel like for you?
Okay. Oh man, that almost feels like two questions, right? So like, as far as like, what does it look and feel like to get to inspire people? If I lived to be 100 and got to still continue to do this work and help people recover, I still wouldn't repay the debt that I owe to the people that loved me through my addiction, to the people that were there for me when I first walked in the rooms, my first sponsors and my first clinician, my first counselor, I view it as a privilege, but it's also a big responsibility, even though like I work for a treatment center and get paid, like I try to keep that as the core of my mission, right? That, my job is to help people, period. More so than my job that I get paid for. Like that's what I can do. And it's really on my heart, especially, and it's kind of fitting, I'm in South Texas right now because I couldn't get sober in South Texas. There wasn't the resources that I needed down here and I had to leave. And so it's part of that mission is to get to come down here to South Texas and talk to people who knew me when I was using, talk to people about the resources and try to be here to support the growth of this profession in South Texas in particular is really important to me. So I guess I answered both questions. Did I answer both of your questions?
You did. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful for that. And it's amazing how you're creating opportunities and possibilities for other people.
All right. So we'll switch gears. I'm going to ask you questions, just whatever, comes into your head. This is just fun.
All right, let's go.
All right. So let's see. What is your favorite sound?
My favorite sound, the coffee machine, first thing in the morning, not the grinder, but the actual machine. When it makes that little hissy sound and that all the water is out and now you can get your coffee, that is a beautiful sound.
That's awesome because the anticipation of reward is greater than the reward. So it's sort of like scoring before you use. It's that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. All right. And what's your least favorite sound?
I mean, I could be real cheesy and be like, oh, like my children's crying, but sometimes sometimes it's funny when they cry. That's terrible. I shouldn't say that. No, my least favorite sound. When you're driving too fast in a car and it bottoms out on a curb, like that's a terrible sound. I hate that. It hurts my teeth.
Yeah, I hate the rims hitting the curb. Also,
yeah. If you have nice rims, that hurts. That hurts.
Yeah. Time to spray paint, baby. Okay, so what is your favorite word?
Consternation.
Nice.
Yeah.
Big word.
It's fun to say. You feel real smart when you say it. Consternation. And I think, I often find myself in situations where, the only other word I could use is like, I'm feeling befuddled, feeling concerned, consternation. It's just,
flummoxed. Try flummoxed. I love that word.
Flummoxed. It's like those three words, they all kind of mean the same thing, right? Befuddled, flummoxed. Flabbergasted.
Yes. Confounded. It's just it's just a quagmire of feeling. All right.
And so often that's what I feel, like,
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's why I know all those words. What's your least favorite word?
Anonymity.
Okay.
Just because I don't dislike the concept of anonymity, but sitting in meetings, the amount of people that struggle to say it, not that like I'm mad at the people for not being able to say it, but like when you first walk into a 12-step room, right? One of the first ways that you're of service is by reading stuff at the beginning of the meeting, right? And like you're new and you're nervous, and then you screw up a word, and I feel bad for them. I feel like we need to find a better way to rework those sentences so that they just as anonymous instead of anonymity.
The big book was written in like when the flowing prose, of Hemingway was sort of like the model, which is terrible nowadays. Like that, we don't write that way. Stephen King didn't write that way. He's a great writer. That's why you were involved. But if it was too much Hemingway, you'd be like, okay, get away with us.
It wasn't. Stephen King is not a flowery writer, And I mean, the big book was written mostly during World War II, right?
In fact, I have a Stephen King book called On Writing.
Yes.
As a writer, I've used. He's good. In an alternative universe, think, multiverse or whatever, Marvel or DC, whatever they use. What would you love to have a stab at? I know you're going to say playing guitar, because I forgot to mention you've been playing guitar since you were 10, but is being a musician like a vocation you'd love to have a stab at?
Yeah. If I could, I didn't mention this, but like I was in some mildly successful local Texas bands towards the end of high school, and by that, I mean, like we might have been able to get signed to like an indie back then. The idea of getting in a van with a punk rock band and just driving around the country, like I wouldn't want to be like an arena rock star. Like I don't want to play,
you want to be a rock star. Yeah.
I want to play little crappy, dirty bars in the Midwest, like that was the dream.
Okay. And what vocation would you loathe doing if you had to do every day for the rest of your life? Or your total life?
God. The people that work the toll booth and they just take your change all day. I'm not knocking the profession, right? All work is honorable work, but the thought of touching that much money from that many people by myself in a box all day, it just seems really sad.
Total infection.
Yeah.
All right. Assuming there's a God, when you die and you're trying to hit the code to get in the gated community of heaven, what would you like to hear come out of God's mouth? It's 0706.
How'd you know my PIN number, man? What? No.
I thought it was 4321. That's what you told me.
I just imagine, like, as cheesy as it sounds, like a Morgan Freeman voice just being like, you did good.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Let's turn it over to the queen of mean. I'm just kidding.
We're going to do today's positive intervention. And thank you, Joseph, so much for participating in this with us. It does start with a quote by the Dalai Lama. We can never obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace with ourselves. For our listeners, how it reads is, life provides tests. It is great, but it is filled with trials, tribulations, and hardships. Abuse, major trauma, and abandonment are only a few examples of painful experiences human beings undergo too often. You cannot change the past, but you are empowered in the present. Pain is not optional, but suffering is. You might have endured great pain in the past, but how much power you allow that past hurt to have over you is up to you in the here and now. This is often easier said than done, as traumas sneak into the psyche in ways that can be extremely difficult to overcome. Fortunately, forgiveness is an especially healing strategy. So when hate, blame, and anger remain, they degrade resilience and erode relationships. If you harbor those emotions, no matter how justified, they erode your ability to love and be loved. If you're tired of the past robbing you of living the best possible life, then practice forgiveness. It is the one peacemaking activity you primarily do for yourself. For today's positive intervention, it was to pray for forgiveness or for the willingness to forgive. See the people who have hurt you as human beings, not perfect beings. Try to envision their thought processes to help shed light on their behavior. This is for you and only you. Today, you are letting go of the past bit by bit and leaving it where it belongs. For many of us, this is something that, we've gotten quite comfortable with in order to find that peace within ourselves. And I was wondering, Joseph, if you could share a little bit on that and kind of what that felt and meant for you as you participated in that positive intervention.
Yeah, well, for me, it just kind of reinforces how big forgiveness has been for me in my whole kind of recovery journey. But the first person I had to forgive was myself, right? I think I mentioned earlier about that negative self-talk kind of thing. And I remember talking to my therapist one time. Her name was Maureen. And I was sitting in a session with her and I said, Maureen, you just don't get it. Like, I'm an asshole. I'm just an asshole. And she looks at me and she goes, I don't think you're an asshole. Who told you you're an asshole? And I was like, oh, me, like dun, dun, dun. and it started with forgiveness to myself. But then, I try to live by a mantra of everybody's doing the best they can, and if I can believe that about the folks that I come into contact with, if someone is, cusses at me or, hurts me in some way or does something that I don't want them to do, or my kids don't listen, or all these little things that cause frustrations and pain. And I find that I can unstick myself from them by simply thinking to myself, like, you know what, like, everybody's just doing the best they can. And then the forgiveness comes real easy and I can move on with my life,
So we do a lot of work at Positive Recovery with our clients on forgiveness. In fact, Dr. Powers within our Positive Recovery curriculum has, a whole module on forgiveness because There's two modules.
Yes,
there is two. And it could actually probably extend into 3. And a lot of time is spent on just what you talked about, Joseph, is trying to help someone learn how to forgive themselves, because it's really hard for them to move forward in any meaningful way when they aren't able to at least take a look and kind of give themselves some grace. Dr. Powers, could you share a little bit with our listeners in terms of forgiveness and the importance around that?
Yeah. And, Joseph, thanks for reminding me about kind of something that Brene Brown talks about is like, be generous with your judgment of others. Like, exactly what you said, that they're doing the best they can instead of, they're coming at me from a place of hatred, or they're hatred for the world. So their character is defamed and all that stuff. So thanks for reminding me of that. And the forgiveness sessions that we use are adapted from an evidence-based entire curriculum that you're right. And it can go on for a while. And I think one of the most important things I learned from my sponsor, and that is still to this day something I struggle with, is forgiveness of self. Is that, I could be my worst critic and continue to tell myself I'm an asshole. And even the knowledge of knowing that it comes from me, because it's kind of like, well, am I doing the best that I can? I mean, I could see that you're doing the best you can. That's easy. You're doing the best you can. I'm not in your head. But I could have done better. So maybe I am an ass, right? And so learning to forgive is such an important tool for recovery, because otherwise we're dragging the stuff from the past with us, or getting mired down in this. When really, like, the past is past. It's like, let's go this way. And the ability to do that is great. And the past should be guidepost, not a hitching post. And without forgiveness, the string keeps you attached to that, like whatever the thing is, whether it's from the other or from the self. And it's really difficult, near impossible to move on and grow. So
absolutely. And it's something you got to work on. At least I still have to work on every day.
That's because you're an asshole.
Because I'm an asshole, right? But no, it's like with the responsibilities of being an employee, a father, a son, a friend, and the nonprofit stuff that I'm involved in, like, there's always something I'm falling short in, or there's always, like, if I take the time out to go to the gym or to do something fun, there's like a sense of like guilt, right? That it's like, no, like, it's okay. Like, you deserve 30 minutes to do, play video games or read or whatever. And you can, it doesn't mean that you failed as a father, as a friend, as a employee or whatever else. And it's tough. I'm better at it some days than others.
Yeah, no, I mean, our last week, one of the podcasts in the past now, Ava Pravada, who's a trauma and family addiction specialist, she talks about, if I don't exercise, meditate, and whatever else, I'm no good for others. So your self-care is a way to give, if that makes sense. Maybe that'll help.
Well, I've heard it, and my brain just doesn't buy it. But I know it's true. I don't know.
Oh my goodness, I know. The brain is such a mess. The mind is such a mess. Oh my goodness.
I still need a lot of work, man.
Man,
they're just thoughts.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure everybody is really digging Joseph Gorordo. Mouthful. The real fat one, translated, not just fat. The fattest one. Man, remember that this is not a dress rehearsal, although we have editors supreme on our podcast. Do the best you can, forgive yourself, and take care of yourself, and take care of others. This is all we got. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2743. We are here to help.